We are going to move on to something called the Babylonian system. This is also a number system, but do we use it these days? Well, not really. But if you become a historian or an archaeologist, you should know how to interpret these. So the Babylonian numerals are quite straightforward. So a downward tick or arrow means a 1, and a sideways would mean a 10. It seems quite straightforward, but we've got to be careful about one important aspect about Babylonian systems, which is the system is actually base 60. Now, one may say, well, where did this 60 come from? If I have to guess, I'm not sure. As I said, I'm not a historian. 360 degrees, divide by 6, you get 60. So could be that. So when we move from the left-hand side to, from the right-hand side to the left, we are actually increasing in powers of 60. So that is something we've got to be very, very particular about. So, for instance, if I wrote that would actually mean, so a downward arrow thing, that's a 1, and the sideways arrow part, arrowhead, that would be a 10. The space in the middle would mean plus. So 10 times 60 raised 0. 1 times 60 raised 1. So that would give me 60 plus 10 times 60 raised 0 is simply 1. 10 times 1 is 10. I get 70. So the number 70 is represented in the Babylonian system in that manner. Here is another case. So I mentioned you have the space that would simply mean putting a plus sign. But what if I say something of that sort? Let me even do that. So I have up, 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 and or downward arrowhead and sideways arrowhead. This would simply mean, well, downward is 1, and sideways would be 10. So I'm specifying 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 10 plus 10. So that would be 23. So there is no multiplying by 60 raised 0 or 60 raised 1 because I don't have multiple digits. So here we have these sideways. We could always go back to that reference. So 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 1 plus 1. There is nothing, no spaces, no second terms. So this would simply mean 60 raised 0, or we're not multiplying by anything. What did I mean by that? I'm simply multiplying by 1. They are one and the same. So the answer would simply be 32. Before we move on, made a silly mistake when I drew the tip here. I think a Babylonian would be quite upset with me. So it should be of that sort. I think I had it backwards. So here we have 10 plus 10 plus 1 plus 1 plus 10 plus 10 plus 1. That would be 43. We don't have to multiply by anything in the sense we're simply multiplying by 1 or 60 raised 0. So here we have 4 terms, and naturally it's going to be a huge number. 4 terms, 4 different spaces. So we have to make use of 60 raised 0, 60 raised 1, 60 raised 2, and 60 raised 3. So once again, going back to our notation here, we have 10 plus 1, 10 plus 1, 10. Let me give more space. So I have 4 different terms, each corresponding to that notation. But since there are 4 different terms in 3 spaces, I've got to multiply from the right-hand side by 60 raised 0. Use a different color. So 11 times 60 raised 3 is 216,000. 11 times 60 squared, 3,600. 11 times 60, and 11 times 1. So that would be 671. That sounds about right. So, of course, you will need a calculator for this one. This is a huge number. So we have 4 terms, and they're all ones. So 1 plus 1 plus 1, 1 plus 1, 1 and 1. We multiply the first one by 60 raised 0, 60 raised 1, 60 raised 2, 60 raised 3. 3 spaces would mean 3 sums. So when we add them all together, we'll have 3 times 60 cubed plus 2 times 60 squared plus 1 times 60 plus 60 raised 0 is simply 1, and 1 times 1 is just 1. And that comes to 655,261. So each V would mean 1. So 1 plus 1 for the first term. The second term would be 10 plus 1. The third term, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. And I'm going to multiply 60 raised 0, 60 raised 1, 60 raised 2. Positions. So 2 times 60 squared, 3,600. Each space would be a plus 11 times 60 plus 4 times 1. If you add them all together, you will get 7864. That's correct. So the first term, I have 10 plus 10. For the second, I have 10 plus 1 plus 1. The last one is 1. I multiply by 60 raised 0, 60 raised 1, 60 raised 2. Each space would be a plus. So 60 raised 0 is just 1, and 1 times 1 is 1. 12 times 60. 20 times 3,600. 60 squared. So if you add them all together in the calculator, you should get 72,721.